Well, it's time to start doing some body work. So we got our fenders all prepped up. All I do, I clean them all off with grease and wax remover real good before I start sanding anything. Plus, this thing had a wrap on it, so it still had some of that glue residue, and the grease and wax remover just took it right off. It worked pretty good. Now, as far as where I'm going to put my body filler, I sand everything down with 80 grit. And like these areas where we did the patch panels, since it's a pretty good size area, I go ahead and sand it out a ways. That way all my body filler on a big area, it's all right on top of bare metal. So if I'm doing a small area, say just an inch or two, I'll sand the majority of the dent down with 80 grit, and then I'll go about 2 inches out with 180 and another 3 or 4 inches out with 220. I don't like my 80 grit scratch going into my existing finish. It just gives you too good of a chance of seeing some shrinkage or some swelling, you know, after everything's done and it's a couple months later. So I really step it out so I don't run into that issue. I'm not a big fan of putting body filler over grinding marks or like 40 grit or 60 grit. I've seen it to where I've seen it shrink, and I've seen it where it's just grinding marks, and it just seems like the body filler doesn't stick to it really good. Another thing I do, every time I put body filler down, if I sand that bare metal down, I clean it with grease and wax remover. Any little bit of dust that sits on that metal, sometimes you can kind of see around your edge of your body filler where it's wanting to kind of tear off the metal, and it just seems like if you clean it real good, you don't have that issue. So what we're going to do, where I did all the welding, I always like to use a fiberglass filler on top of my welds. You don't have to. I've just done it that way forever, and it seems to work, and I've never had any of my weld edges, you know, shrink up and show through on my paint. So I always use fiberglass where I welded. And then we'll just go ahead and use regular body filler on top of that. Now you can see I have a scale. I always weigh my body filler. It even says right on the can, the correct way is to add your hardener 2% by weight. And then it goes into the by guess and by golly of a golf ball size and a string of hardener. Why? Come on, guys. You know, we properly mix our primer up. There's a ratio for that. There's a ratio for our sealer. There's a ratio for our base coat. You got to mix your base coat on a scale by the grams. Same thing with your clear coat. There's a ratio for that. Usually clear coat's got clear coat, hardener, and reducer in it. So everything you're putting on top of your body filler, I mean, really, we're just going to guess how much hardener goes in it? No. Mix it the right way, and you'll get predictable results. So every can of body filler comes with one thing of cream hardener. Believe it or not, that one thing of cream hardener is more than enough to last your whole gallon of body filler. If you're ordering body filler that comes with cream hardener and you're ordering an extra thing of cream hardener, you're putting in way too much hardener. Now, the other reason, besides the fact that everything that goes on top, we mix properly, why not mix your body filler properly? There are side effects to not mixing your body filler properly. One, your dry times aren't the same. Sometimes it can dry really fast, sometimes it can dry really slow, depending on how much hardener you put it in. The other thing, and this is a huge thing, sandability. If you're always complaining about your body filler sanding bad, it's probably because you're not hardening it the right way. This particular body filler, you do your 2% by weight, sands absolutely amazing. I don't use any kind of 40 grit when I cut it. I just cut her down with the 80 grit and then move up to 120, 180, and sometimes 220 depending on the job. And it sands great. Another issue if you don't weigh your body filler. Have you ever done a big area body filler and then you got to put a little bit right in the center? And you don't like doing that because you put that little bit right in the center, then you go to sand it, and then it always wants to sand the other body filler faster than it does where you just added it. If you mix it the right way, everything sands the same. I can have a huge area of body filler and put a little bit of body filler right in the middle, and I can sand it down and everything cuts down nice and even. So it does make a huge difference. Plus, the other thing, if you're over hardening or under hardening, you can have issues with it sticking. It might stick right now when you're working on it, and it might make it a year or two, maybe even 3 or 4. But I've seen it where it starts cracking, it starts failing, it starts falling off the metal. Most of the time, it's because you didn't mix it the right way. Another thing I've seen a lot of, seen guys, they'll do a hail job or even worse. I've seen it a couple of times on classic cars, especially on light colors. Put too much hardener in it, especially on a white, she's eventually going to bleed through. So usually you end up with a bunch of yellow spots all over the car. And if it's a hail job, it's all polka dotted. And if it's a restoration job, oh, if you got a pissed off customer, if you did it yourself, you're pissed because you did all this work. And step 1 was your body filler, and that was where your problem's at. So we're going to go ahead, we're going to weigh this stuff out, and then I'll see you over at the panels, and we'll get our fiberglass filler on it. One other thing with the fiberglass filler. If you let the fiberglass filler completely dry, dude, it sands like a rock. So when I put my fiberglass filler on, I basically babysit it. And as soon as it's firm enough to sand, I cut it. And then I'll let it finish curing out so I can do my final sand on it. Otherwise, dude, it's next to impossible to sand. So let's get to it. Now I always press pretty good on this fiberglass filler. It's pretty thick. So I try to get it on there smooth as possible and really push down on it good to get all my air bubbles out. Okay, it's been about 4 or 5 minutes and she's just firm enough to sand. So we're just gonna knock her down with the DA. Keep it. So like right now it's starting to really set up. That's why you want to get on this fiberglass as fast as you can. That's it. We'll let it finish drying And then as soon as it's done drying, we'll just DA this top surface down with some 80 grit, clean it off, and we'll put our top layer body filler on it. There's what 2% hardener looks like. So if you just do your one string across your puddle, like most guys do that don't weigh it, I mean, you're pretty close, but you're still guessing. And then I just stir it up really good. And then after it's stirred up, I smash it down. That gets all your air out. Less air, less pinholes. Okay. Now when I apply it, especially my first coat, I really try to push that body filler down. That way it fills any pinholes in on the body filler that's underneath of it. And I'm a big fan of going a little further than you think you need to go, because in all honesty, it sands off pretty fast. So I'm not too worried about putting a little too much, because most of that will come off with the DA. And then when we're all done, I'll go ahead and mill gauge this for you guys so you see how much body filler is actually on there. Hopefully I mixed up enough to do both fenders. Then the other thing too, you see I'm using cardboard. And you hear me talk about doing everything the right way and reading your TDS sheets and blah, blah, blah. Okay. There's no way to do body work and paint work and not cheat a little bit. Now in a perfect world, I would use some of that polyback paper. You see it where it comes on the thick cardboard and you got whatever 100 sheets or a couple hundred sheets of paper on it. That stuff is actually designed for body filler. That way the paper doesn't suck any of the resins off of your or out of your body filler. So in the perfect world, you'd use something like that. And in regular collision, it works amazing. You can mix your body filler on one sheet, do your job, tear that sheet off. You don't have any cleanup work. But when you start doing restoration, you end up mixing quite a bit of body filler. And those sheets just aren't quite big enough. And you end up mixing your filler, it goes over one sheet, sticks to the other sheet, and it's just a hassle. And then you could use a piece of metal. But then you gotta clean that metal off every single time. So I've tried it every way I can possibly try it, and it just works out better using a piece of cardboard. Not the perfect thing to do, but it works and it's efficient. And I've never had any problems with it taking too much resin out of the body filler. But it is not what we would consider absolute best thing to use. So with that said, I do cheat a little bit. And this is one of my cheats that I use using cardboard. All right, our body filler's dry. We're just gonna take a DA and some 80 grit and knock the top down. Right, next step, just gonna use a straight Durablock. I don't know, it's probably 12 inches with 80 grit. Now when I sand this, I'm just kind of letting the block float over it. And then when I get to the edges, I am pushing down a little bit harder on my edge to kind of walk that body filler in. A little high right here, so I kind of apply a little bit more pressure there. Okay, so she looks like with 80. Move on to 120. Okay, we're gonna move on to our second cut. And I know I told you 120. Had a little bit of a brain fart. I forgot I switched my sandpaper over because the other brand I was using just got insanely expensive like everything else. You know, thanks Congress, keep printing that money. It's really working out good for us. Anyways, so I'm gonna use 150 grit, and I use a long, flexible block. Unfortunately, this style block, well, this company, this AFS company is now out of business, which is a bummer because I've had this block for probably, I don't know, 10 or 15 years. This is the second one I've gone through. And they were a damn good block. You had 3 steel rods so you could pick your stiffness. We're just gonna put 1 rod in there. I did some quick research. It looks like a company called Black Diamond makes something similar, so I'll have to get one of those and give it a shot. But there is a little bit of a curve here, so I need a block that flexes just a little bit because it'll flex good on that curve. So let's get to it. Okay, so as I'm sanding, I'm starting to get pretty thin up here. I'm still pretty thick here. So as I'm going back and forth, on my thicker areas, I'm putting more pressure down on those thicker areas and kind of just letting the block float on those thinner areas. Okay, that's it for 150. Well, not quite it. I got some high spots right here on the edge. So I'll get a foam block in here and I'll knock these high spots down and then we'll move on. Okay, here's what it looks like after we've cut it with 80 and 150 and or 120, depending on what you got. Now, I stop here. You can start to see where we're almost cutting through our metal there. You can see it there. It's probably hard to see on the camera, but there's a spot there. And we're starting to cut through here. Okay, so we're gonna switch over to 180. That way I got a little bit more control as far as finishing this up. Now, you've seen that I didn't use any kind of like a guide coat. The freaking body filler's telling you what it wants. You know, you can see here, obviously that was a high spot and we're cutting through the high spot. Same thing with there. We got a little bit of, you know, from when we're putting our body filler on and it overlaps.
we got a couple spots that didn't cut down all the way. Well, that's obviously a low spot. So we'll just take a little bit of 80 grit, we'll sand that in, and we'll just fill those couple of little spots. I got one over here as well. So like I said, the body filler is telling you that this is a low spot. So like I said, it's kind of a waste of time for me to use guide coat because it's telling you what it wants. And then, like the other thing you can see here where the body filler is really fading out good. Well, that's telling you that this area is pretty darn level. And we need to cut it some more so we can get down to right towards the edge so we have the least amount of body filler, you know, as possible. Right here, and always on these corners, that metal is always kind of like curved up on the edge from the stamping. It just is what it is. But when you have a sharp edge like this, I mean, it's telling you that either you gotta bridge this or you gotta kind of feather that back to the original shape. And we'll just feather it back because we'll prime it and that'll fix all that. But a sharp edge tells you that, you know, it's a little high. It's either high or it's low and you're bridging it. Well, I can run my hand over it and I can tell you like this is high right here. So we'll keep cutting this down to where we don't have that sharp edge. Either that or I gotta put body filler out to there to bridge that over. Same thing over here. You know, you got a sharp edge. It's starting to fade there. I can still fill an edge. So with having that sharp edge, I know something's going on right here. When we get over here to the other end of it, see how it's really blending in good? I mean, you don't even have to rub your hand across it to know that that's about perfectly straight. Our edge, we'll cut this all down with 180 grit. You know, I got a bunch of pinholes in there, but our edge is super thick. And I just like cutting the edges down with 180 grit. I just have more control over it. Let's get to it. Okay, we're gonna move on to our 180. Like I showed you guys, I got a little bit of a high spot here and here. So we're just gonna take a small block and cut that down before we hit it with our big block. That's it. Now we just got to do our edge. And we'll get to doing our edge. Well, we still got to clean up our edge, but before we do that, I always spray grease and wax remover on it, then I can really look at it and see what it looks like. So, see how it looks like it's nice and clear coated? You can really kind of stand back, look at it, see if you've got it, everything good. I'm pretty happy. Everything looks good there. It's really hard getting this camera to where you guys can see what I can see. And I don't do any of that funny try to hide stuff. If I see something ugly, I'll tell you. We're gonna call that good for primer. And then what I'll do once everything's done, let me wipe this off. I don't like it sitting on there for too long. So what I'll do once it's all done, I'll take some 180 grit and use a foam interface pad and go over it with some 180 grit. That kind of knocks it down to about 200 because that interface pad isn't really pushing that 180 grit all the way down in there. And I don't like priming right over my block sands. You just got, you know, you got sharp edges. And there's just a chance if one of those sharp edges is just a little deep, you might have some shrinkage show up later. So I found that using that interface pad to finish off my body filler, you know, because you're not sanding the body filler down. You're just sanding that very top edge of it down to get that sand scratch out. So we'll get our edge cleaned up. We'll go from there. So one thing to talk about with this body filler and kind of how it's talking to you. So you can see like an area like this where I'm almost burned through. When you get to that, you know that you're about done for. So you start seeing areas like this, but let's say this area is super low. Stop. It's time to fill this area and fill it into about there and then sand again. Once you break through all the way, you're done. Stop. Because all you're going to do is create a low spot here and a low spot here if you keep sanding. There's no magic to make it any straighter than however it is right now. As soon as you burn through, you're done. Same thing with over here. I think this is one of those holes I welded in, so it's a little high. But it's fine. It's perfect. You can see where the body filler is super thin here, and it just started to cut through there. But I got a nice feather edge here. And obviously, I got plenty of filler there. So we're fine. It looks great with the grease and wax remover on it, but there's no more sanding left on that spot. Another thing to look at, this is a great example. See how sharp that edge is? And like I said, when these things are stamped, this thing kind of has a natural like bend into it. It's not like this flare comes in and it comes straight to the edge. It kind of dips down and then up. Same thing with these edges, and it's like this on pretty much everything. Right at the edge, it seems like it kind of dips down and then up. Just something to do with the stamping. So, like for what this is, because it curves down and it kind of curves in, I'm not worried about that. Once I prime it and sand with that curve, it's all going to blend together. Now, if I'm wanting to make this like stupid, crazy, absolutely perfect, I mean like top end show car, I would have to either put body filler all the way to there, or I have to prime this, with 3 to 4 coats, sand this all down, and then prime it again with about 3 coats, sand it down, and that'll come out. But the body filler's talking to you. It's telling you if there's a sharp edge there, you got a low spot here. This is a little high, this is a little high, and as you're sanding, you're actually bridging over that low spot so you get a sharp edge. So if I had an edge this sharp and it was over here, that's telling me I got to put more filler on there, or I got a high spot here and I need to tap that down, sand it some more, and then fill it. You get a nice soft edge like this, especially, because this part of the panel here is very straight. So you got to have a nice soft edge as you're going into your work area. And if you don't, the body filler is telling you got something going on there. Usually it's because it's high here and it's high here. So usually you got to put filler in, or you got to be able to sand this area down further to kind of walk this high spot down into all this. But obviously I can't do that. I'm starting to hit high edges here. So there you go.
Okay, let's get our line all finished up. So we're just gonna take some tape and we're gonna tape our line. Now this area here has been sanded down, so it's actually pushed our line up. So we're gonna tape on our blocked area first, which is gonna give us an idea how far to sand down on that top area. And then just sand to your line. Okay, and when we're sanded down where we need, so I just take a little bit of grease and wax remover, I hit it. Hit it with a little bit of air. And then I'll tape my other line on the other side to match my first line. I always hit it with some grease and wax remover, that way it takes all the dust off and my tape actually sticks to it.
And we'll walk this line back. I need this line to go back just a touch. So I'll just retape it back a touch. So there's our line. It's nice and sharp, but what we got, you always get pinholes around your lines because it's just so hard to put body filler on the sharp edge and really smash it down in there. So we'll fill in those couple of pinholes and then we'll roll our edge with some 220 and she's done. Okay, we're gonna take some 220 and a semi-soft block and we're gonna roll our edge. I just use very light pressure and kind of let the block do what it wants to do. All I'm doing is kind of watching my edges here and here, and it'll tell me when I've cut enough. That's it. She's done. Well, it's time to move on to the doors. And I wish I could say it was as easy as just sand them down and paint them. And if you're going for just a standard paint job, it literally is that easy. Find your handful of dents, sand it down, paint it. You're good to go. I'm gonna go ahead, once this is all done, I'm gonna block sand and buff out all the clear coat. So I want to make sure my panels are as straight as possible. It's not just a look thing. I mean, obviously it looks 1,000 times better if everything's blocked down perfect. But these panels aren't perfect. A lot of your edges, you know, it's all due to stamping. A lot of your edges are up a little bit higher than your centers are. So if I block everything down, I can cut all those edges down. That way when I make it to the wet sanding and buffing part, I don't hit any high spots and cut through and then have to repaint the entire panel. It's more of just a prep. That way you have less chance of burning through on your clear coat. So what I'll do to prep this whole panel, I'm gonna clean everything off with grease and wax remover. I'll find the handful of dents that are on here. I mean, why run my hand over it if I can just look at shiny paint to find dents? So I'll find all my dents. I mark them all out with a pencil. A lot of people don't think about this. If you use a pen, make sure you get every little bit of that ink off. A pen's gonna bleed through. A marker's gonna bleed through. I've seen it. So I always use a pencil to mark everything. We're gonna sand all this yellow off, so I'll hit all the yellow with 80 grit on a DA. And then we'll block sand everything on this thing with 220 grit, and then we'll go over it with the DA with an interface pad with 220 grit. We're just gonna put probably only 2 coats of primer on this thing. It gives me a little bit of a barrier to lock all the paint in. It gives me something to do my final block sand with. I might do 3 coats, but if I spray 2 coats while it's wet and I look at it and everything looks nice and straight, I'm gonna stop at 2 coats. Only reason for that is, 1, why use up the product if I don't have to use up the product? 2, all these little tight areas, if you start really stacking your primer in these areas, you just have a chance of it eventually cracking in those areas. Even when I do restoration, I'm hammering it down with primer. When I sand it, I'll come into all these tight areas and I way over sand them to get almost all the primer out. That way, you know, 5 years from now, 10 years from now, it doesn't crack along all those areas where you got super thick primer. Or even when I'm priming and something like this, let's say I want this area to have more primer on it, I'll put my initial 2 coats on, and then I might just hit those couple of sections with 3 or 4 coats, and I'll try to stay away from areas like this. So I'm basically just gonna do 1 door. I think if you see me do 1 door, that's probably good enough. The other door is just rinse and repeat. So let's get to this. Okay, so these 2 panels are ready to get some primer on it. I kind of wanted to show you how thick the body filler is. That way you got an idea of what's actually on here, and it kind of gives you an idea on how much warpage that you can deem yourself as acceptable. Some of you guys are gonna think that I gotta have it perfect. That's great for you. I'm a person that if it's close enough, I'm gonna put body filler on it because it's just faster. I mean, all this body work right here I had done in less than an hour. Well, I can do an hour's worth of work on body filler, or I can do a day's worth of work on getting it absolutely perfect. I'm gonna go for the hour's worth of work on body filler. Now, we're gonna measure this in mils, and just to give you an idea, 1/16 of an inch thick is about 60 mils. 1/32 of an inch thick is about 30 mils. And remember, it's probably not the best practice, but you can max out your body filler to about 1/4 of an inch. And when we were measuring this out, I was kind of showing you that we were about 1/16 of an inch is what I was guessing. So let's see there. We're at 0 on metal, 4.2, 12, 14, 17, 27, 29. So anywhere from about 10 to, we'll call it 30 mils. Like I said, 30 mils is only 1/32 of an inch. So as I was putting this body filler on, if you're like, man, that's a lot of thick body filler. No, I spread it out. I push it down pretty hard so it's not that thick. And like I just showed you, the thickest area is about 1/32 of an inch. So hopefully this helps you guys.
Well, it's time to start priming this stuff. So the product I'm going to use a Sikkens Autocoat BT. It's a fleet product made for semi-trucks. I like the primer when it comes to doing big projects and restorations. It seems like the fleet stuff, you know, obviously it's designed for bigger body panels. So it seems to work really good for me for restoration. And I've used all kinds of different products, and I'm not saying this is the best one. This is just what I use. So let's get into how I prime. When I work on, gosh, any of this stuff that's older than like 2000, so anything, you know, 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, I like to use an epoxy for my first coat. And the reason for that, you just have so many different kinds of undercoats as far as the original paint. You know, in your 60s, 70s, and 80s, a lot of that stuff was lacquer. So I usually try to strip all that paint off if I'm doing something, but it just depends on what the customer's willing to pay. You know, sometimes you got to paint on top of those old lacquers. I don't like to do it, but it just depends on, you know, what the customer's paying for. So to lock that old paint down, I like to use an epoxy. And especially you start getting into like the 90s stuff. Gosh, these manufacturers mixed all kinds of paints together. There might be some lacquer on it, there might be some acrylic, there might be some enamel, there might be some urethanes on it. And you can really see it, especially like in these panels here, and this is a 96. You can see it when you sand that white top coat sometimes kind of tears away from the primer that's underneath of it. And that just tells me that it might not have the best adhesion, you know, so yeah, you really should strip them all down, but you know, then you're talking about how much time do you want to have in a job. So when I sand it, I can kind of see that edge from the color down to the primer. I know I'm going to have some issues. And it seems like when you use an epoxy for your first layer, it kind of locks all that stuff in. Versus if you just hammer on your urethane primers, that's what, you know, most of the primers are these days. Sometimes it wants to lift around that edge, or sometimes it'll really shrink up or swell up really bad around that edge. And it seems like that epoxy just helps to lock it all down. So what I'll do is I'll put one coat of epoxy down, and then I'll do 3 coats of urethane primer on top of that. When you're mixing epoxies and urethanes, just make sure you're using a product that is designed to be a wet on wet. Otherwise you would have to put your epoxy down, scuff it up, and then put your urethane down, and then, you know, what's the point in doing this process to save time? So that Sikkens product that I'm going to use, I am allowed to put my urethane primer on top of that epoxy after a 45-minute flash off time, and up to, gosh, I think it's like 7 days I can go. So I'll go ahead and I'll put my epoxy down, I'll let it flash off, and then I'll put my primer right on top of it. That really helps to lock it down. Plus, that epoxy is going to be a slightly different gray than my primer is. So as I'm sanding my primer, once I start seeing that different color, I know I need to stop sanding there and either put more primer on top of it or we'll call it good at that point. So let's get to priming this bad boy.
Okay, everything's primed up. I'm gonna kind of show you guys why I like using fleet primer. Here it is. Try to get it where you can see it good. The fleet primers dry way slower. That way you can hit big areas. But when it dries slower, it lays down a whole lot nicer. So I got next to, it kind of looks like sealer once it's done. It's got a little bit of a shine to it, and it doesn't have a whole lot of orange peel in it. And that's because of how slow it dries. And then doing all these panels, like if I use just a regular collision style primer, they just seem to dry so fast. So when I did all these panels, I have enough time to make it all the way around, and I still have about a 5-minute wait time before I put my second coat on. I mean, that's how slow it dries. So that's what they look like.
Okay, now that they're all primed up, let's kind of talk about some dry times and thicknesses and all that good stuff. So if I was just doing regular collision work and doing a small repair, with this particular product, I can accelerate it. So if I was just doing small repair, I'm gonna accelerate it, wait my flash off times, I'll throw a heat lamp on it for about 20 minutes. And as soon as it cools back down, I'm ready to sand it. Or I could prime it in the evening, and then by the next day, it's plenty good enough to sand. But when I'm doing a big project like this, or like a restoration on a car, I'll let it just naturally dry, and I'll let it dry for at least 2 weeks. I've found that that 2-week time frame really works good to fully let it cure. And it does sand a little bit better when you just let it naturally dry. And I don't have a bake booth, so like a big shop, restoration shop, they're probably gonna prime it, bake it, and it's fully cured and ready to sand in the next day or two. I don't have a bake booth, so I just go up to 2 weeks, and when you're doing a big project, 2 weeks isn't that long to wait because you got plenty of other stuff to do on the job. This job, 3 coats of primer is good enough. I won't have to reprime anything. Worst case scenario, I might have 1 or 2 little burn through areas and I'll just spot prime those. If I'm doing a full restoration where I sandblasted it all down, I got a bunch of body filler on there, I'm gonna put 3 coats of primer on. I'll sand that down with 180, then 220. I'll put 3 more coats of primer on, and then I'll move up to 220, then 320, then 400 grit. And that just gives me a perfect body panel. Then as far as like this product I'm using, 3 coats of primer gives me right around 6 mils of thickness. Some of your other regular collision primers, man, you can really hammer them on and get almost 3 mils per coat, you know, so you can be right around, 8 to 9 mils with just 3 coats. But they don't lay down as nice as this stuff does. So another thing with getting this primer to lay down really good, I do use a good primer gun. I use a Sonic Jet 100 BF HVLP with a 1.9 tip, and I do spray it around the 27 to 29 psi, which usually you got to be in a paint booth, or if you're doing it in an open area, you can't have anything around because it blows over spray just like you're spraying regular sealer. But man, does it lay down nice. The primer gun makes a big difference, and I've used the cheaper primer guns, and if you're spraying out in the shop, especially in a collision area, you got that pressure turned way down so you're not blowing over spray all over the darn place. And you just get more orange spill. Well, on these big jobs, I want to cut my orange spill down to a minimum. It's just less stuff I have to sand down. So there's kind of how I do my priming and what it looks like when it's done. If you could, like and subscribe, it really helps me out. Thank you.